Welcome back to Godly Play at Life Church. Last week, you learned about the time when God gave his people the 10 best ways to live through Moses. Today, we're going to go a little bit backwards in the Bible to a time when Moses was a little tiny baby, long before that day on Mount Sinai when he received the 10 commandments from God. See, the people of God were living in Egypt. You'll remember they went there when there was a great famine, and Joseph helped provide food for them. Many years had passed, and there was a new Pharaoh in Egypt who didn't remember Joseph or what he had done for his country. The people of God were living in Egypt as slaves. They couldn't escape. In this time, the Pharaoh was getting nervous because the people of God were growing in numbers, and he was afraid that someday they would rise up and revolt against him. So he issued a horrible decree that all of the boy babies of the people of God were to be killed when they were born. Well, one mom decided that she was going to try and save her baby. Took her baby and she made a basket out of bulrushes, and she put the baby into the basket. Then she went down to the Nile River and she hid the basket among the reeds in the water. Later that day, a princess, Pharaoh's daughter, came along. She saw the baby in the basket and she pulled him out of the water. She took him home with her and she named him Moses. She raised him in the palace. Moses grew up, and one day he saw one of the Egyptians beating one of God's people, and Moses became very angry, so angry that he attacked and killed the Egyptian. He was very scared after that, and he ran away into the desert. While he was in the desert, he met a man named Jethro, and he went to live with his family. Moses married Jethro's daughter, Zipporah, and he became a shepherd. He lived in the desert as a shepherd for 40 years. One day, when Moses was in the desert watching over the sheep, he came to a place called Mount Horeb. Now, another name for this place is Mount Sinai. And there he saw something amazing. There was a bush, and it was on fire. It was burning, but it wasn't burning up. God spoke to Moses through that burning bush. He told Moses that he had heard the cries of his people who were slaves in Egypt, and he was sending Moses to set them free. But who am I to do such a thing as that, said Moses. God said, I will be with you. What is your name? Asked Moses. I am Yahweh. I am who I am, said God. Now, Moses was pretty nervous, so he said, couldn't you send somebody else? God told Moses that his brother Aaron would go with him and speak for him. So they went into Egypt and they spoke to Pharaoh. Pharaoh didn't like the idea of letting the people go. And again, they would say, let my people go. And Pharaoh said, no. Let God's people go. And Pharaoh said, no. Terrible things began to happen in Egypt. And at last, Pharaoh changed his mind and said, yes, the people could leave. Moses led them out of Egypt to the place where they came to the Red Sea. And there God parted the waters so that his people could walk through and escape. After that, the people of God lived for 40 years in the desert. Now, we've talked about this before. The desert is a very difficult place to live. And after a while, they started to grumble and complain. But God was with them. He provided them with food to eat. He sent them quail. Probably tastes like chicken. And he sent them manna to eat as well. But still, they complained. In fact, at one point they became very thirsty, and they were very unhappy with Moses. So God gave Moses directions to go to a rock. And to strike the rock with his staff. And water came out of the rock. God provided water for his people. But on that day, Moses broke faith with God. And so God told him that when they eventually reached the promised land, Moses would not be able to enter with the people of God. Now, after this, we get to the 10 best ways to live, because it was during that time in the desert when God gave his people the 10 best ways. That was all that you learned about last week. Moses went up to Mount Sinai, and he was gone for a really long time. And the people down below started to wonder, what's happening with Moses? Where is he? And they got scared and nervous. And they did something terrible. They asked Aaron to make them a god to worship. And Aaron collected all of the gold from all of their jewelry, and he melted it down. And he molded a golden calf. And the people bowed down and they worshiped this. It's not even a real cow. They worshipped a fake gold cow. Well, finally, Moses came down off Mount Sinai, and his face was glowing because he had been so close to God, and God had been so close to him. And he comes down and he's holding the 10 best ways to live, and he sees that the people made an idol to worship. And he became very angry, and he threw down the 10 best ways, and they broke. People of God were very sorry for what they had done. And so God gave them a new set of the 10 best ways to live. He also gave them directions to make something to hold the 10 best ways inside of. It was called an ark. It was covered in gold, and it had poles on either side so the people could carry it with them. And they would open it up, and they put the 10 best ways inside, and then wherever they went in the desert, they would carry the ark with them. And they learned how to set up a tent. And God gave them directions to go into the tent and how they could worship and honor him. And when Moses went into the tent where the ark was, and he came back out again, once again, his face was glowing because he had been so close to God, and God had been so close to him. And that brings us to just about the end of the story. Because after this, the people made it to the promised land. And Moses was able to stand on a place called Mount Nebo and look over the promised land that God had set apart for his people. Now remember, Moses wasn't able to cross over into the promised land, but the people of God were. Moses died before crossing. Well, can't say before crossing because he wasn't allowed to go in. But Moses died at that point. He was a very old man, and leadership for God's people passed on to Joshua. So, looking back at the life of Moses, we can see many things happened. Often he was given directions from God about how to make things for his people to help them worship and how to lead them with the 10 best ways. He saw the people make mistakes, like when they made the golden calf. Sometimes he lost his temper, like in the desert with the water, the rock, and the staff, and also back in Egypt when he killed the Egyptian. God provided for Moses and his people. He gave them food and water, and he helped them cross the Red Sea and escape from Pharaoh and his army. We know that God spoke to Moses in many ways, including using a burning bush. We know that Moses was rescued as a child, that his mom did a really courageous thing, putting him in a basket into the Nile River, and that God sent the princess to rescue him. And all of this was part of a bigger rescue story, to rescue God's people and take them out of Egypt and into the promised land. So now it's time for I Wonder.
I wonder what part of the story you liked best. I wonder what part of the story is most important. I wonder what part of the story was about you, or especially for you. I wonder if there's any part of the story that we could leave out and still have all of the story that we need.
So now it's your turn. What are you going to do with what you just learned? There's lots of choices. You could draw a picture or make something like maybe the 10 best ways out of clay or Play-Doh. You could retell part of the story to someone. I actually did something a little bit different this week. It's called sketch doodling. And I made sort of a stick figure picture of what happened in the story to help me remember it so I could tell it better. You might just want to take a little part of the story and make something to help you remember it. Whatever you choose to do, I hope you have a wonderful week and you're back here next Sunday to join us for Godly Play. Bye, everyone.